Good day everyone, so hope you're all doing really well. In today's video I'll be giving you a comprehensive discussion about Kokomi versus Sigewinne in a mono hydro team with C0 Farina. So this is going to be quite an interesting discussion. Now if you want to follow along, I'd really appreciate that because we're going to be talking a bit about some theory which is really important to the discussion. But if you're impatient, well, there are timestamps in the description below, so you can obviously watch wherever you want to, but do keep in mind that as I'm going through this video, some discussion points will reference earlier parts, so that's just for you to be aware of. Regardless, from my perspective as a Kokomi main, I'm not here to really tell you who is the better hydro unit because I like both Kokomi and Sigewinne. I'm really here just to highlight to you all the intricacies and things that people don't talk about, and hopefully you'll gain a bit of a new perspective. So, to get a new perspective, let's do a bit of theory, and this is all with regards to Farina's Fanfare mechanics. So effectively, a lot of people don't really understand this, but her Fanfare works on a percentage point basis. So let me give you a simple example. Assume Kokomi heals 7,500 and assume you've got a character with 15,000 HP, which is going to be similar to what I'm showing here as background footage. Now what happens when Kokomi heals this 15k HP character? Well, 7,500 divided by 15,000 is, you guessed it, 50%, and that means you get 50 out of the total maximum 300 Fanfare stacks, which you can more or less confirm here with the incoming healing bonus numbers in the background. So what does this mean? Well, in a mono hydro team, if you've got Sigewinne and Yelon and Farina and your Animo units, then well, all of your hydro units have very large HP pools, so the amount that you will heal them is not really going to give you a lot of swings in terms of the Fanfare stacks. That's important. It's mostly going to be from excessive healing on your Animo unit. Well, that's the theory at least. But what makes this really interesting is that Sigewinne herself has this bond of life mechanic. So effectively she stops any healing happening until her final little bubble hits an enemy, which then gives her a massive healing bonus or bump up. This means that when it comes to Farina's Fanfare stacks, you can actually generate quite a bit just from Sigewinne's final healing instance, which is kind of the way in which they designed the character. Now obviously there's a bit of a downside to this, because if you're playing Sigewinne with Farina and you're below 50% HP, then Sigewinne cannot give extra or offerings in terms of HP damage to Farina's pets, so that is a bit of an anti-synergy that happens there, as well as the fact that if you have C1 Sigewinne, whilst you get higher covalent stacks, you actually delay when you get that massive HP heal, which I think is a bit of an oversight from the Hoyo devs, which is again anti-synergy with Farina. And then at C2, well, you gain a shield, which means you have less chance of the enemy hitting you to induce HP changes, which once again gives you less Fanfare stacks, but of course you then have the higher Hydro Res Shred. So definitely Sigewinne's first two constellations have a bit of anti-synergy in this regard, but as you will see later on, she does get the Fanfare stacks a bit quicker in the rotation than Kokomi does. So despite these being theoretical problems that I can see, in practice things do, or at least play out very differently. So when it comes to what I'll be showing to you today, you'll see here I've got a stock standard Kokomi, so these will be the reference build, a level 80 prototype Amber. This is just to make sure that Sigewinne and Kokomi, well, are relatively on par. However, do keep in mind that my Kokomi is, well, a Kokomi that I've been having for 3 years, hence her stats are going to be better than a 4-day-old Sigewinne on my accounts. I mean, that's just going to be the reality for most people. Regardless of that fact, what I want you to keep in mind is not the clearing times in today's Abyss run, but rather I want you to look at what each character brings and how they effectively change the playstyle for the team. For instance, look at things like how quickly we can shred the opponent's pyro shields, how quickly we build Fanfare stacks, which units are going to be used more often, what does this mean for your defensive utility, how mobile is the team, etc, etc. These are the real conversation points that I think makes this discussion very interesting. So to kickstart the showcases, we are here with the Sigewinne team, and what we're going to quickly do is try and use our Elemental Burst and a bit of Yelan Breakthrough Bob to try and break down the Pyrolector shields. You can see here all the Hydro units are contributing, and this is where obviously the Covalent stack starts for Sigewinne. You'll see that the strategy here against the Pyrolectors is pretty simple. Group them and try and hit them simultaneously as much as possible. But you can see here we're now already into the second rotation here with Yelan. We're going to go here with Farina, and it's very comfy. I mean, so far we're not really struggling to get any energy. We're just going to try and see if we can get these enemies together, use and fuse the Hydra into Sucrose's Elemental Burst, and just tank here with Sigewinne. Sigewinne actually gains, like, I think, complete interruption to resistance during her Elemental Burst, which makes her very useful for inducing HP changes, so that you can build faster Farina stacks, as you saw there, as well as just being able to keep your position and then quickly and immediately follow up. So that flexibility is really awesome. So here I want you to notice something else. We're going to start hitting the opponents, but we don't have Yelan's Elemental Burst here. We're effectively just using the pets of Farina and that's flat buff from Sigewinne, the Songs of Days Past and her Covalent stacks, and that actually did quite a decent amount of damage. This means that we can now slow down a bit, we can start saving up a bit of energy for the next floors, and I found this to be incredibly comfy, and the fact is the entire team, as you saw right there at the end, is max HP. Right, so here with the Kokomi team, we're going to do more or less exactly what we did in the beginning, except we didn't really use Farina's pets. But you can see here now that with everything that's on the field, we cleared the Hydro Pyro Auras in just about roughly the same time. But here is where I feel Kokomi does have a bit of advantage against these specific enemies. You see, the little Bake Karage jellyfish is so good because of its AoE Hydro that it's just going to consistently give to us. And this is, you'll see in a bit, it's just going to make sure that we can beat the Pyrolectors in a much faster clearing time, and this is where the entire team synergies become really natural. You see me holding off on Kokomi's Elemental Burst, quickly battering the team, because Kokomi's Burst applies 2 units of Pyro, which can break these little Lecter constructs almost instantly, which is one of the big advantages. You can see how quickly we've gone there, and now we can quickly go to these guys, but do note that whilst our team is full in terms of its survivability, we don't have quite the same amount of energy. So this is the cool thing about Kokomi versus Sigewinne. Sigewinne, when she pops her bubble, can immediately give you 4 Hydro Particles. So if you need to funnel it to Farina or Yelan, well, you have it. Whereas with Kokomi, you get these Hydro Particles effectively 4 or 5 over a period of 7 seconds. So that is definitely something very interesting to notice from a practical perspective. So let's talk a bit about the Fanfare stack. So here, let's take a bit of a notice as to how long we're going to build our Fanfare stacks, and once we get to max Fanfare, and how long Farina's buff is still on the field. There we go, there's max Fanfare stacks before it disappears. This is going to be really important because we're going to make a direct comparison against Kokomi's as well. So one thing I found is that Sigewinne really complements the playstyle here with Farina. So once you've set up your buffs, she heals the team really effectively, and she builds, or she ramps up Farina's Fanfare stacks a lot quicker than what Kokomi does. So effectively, if you think about it, what Sigewinne does is, whilst you've got like the Hydro Shred from your Animo unit, Sigewinne gives a flat damage bonus buff to Farina, and that means a lot of your damage is more on the front loaded part. So by the time you build stacks, Fanfare stacks and Yelan's damage ramp, you lose out obviously on the Vivi buff and Sigewinne's buff, but obviously the Songs of Days Past is going to help keep that up. Effectively, what Sigewinne is doing, if you think about it conceptually, she is equalizing the damage, the front loaded and the back loaded damage, so that you can have more consistent throughput. This is obviously in contrast to someone like Kokomi and Kokomi's team that effectively gradually ramps up everything, but by the time you get to the maximum Fanfare stacks of Kokomi, you obviously have lost like your Hydro buff, which is obviously a bit of a downside. So that is how you can perhaps interpret these two characters. The way in which they buff and which they put their damage on the field is very interesting, and they give you a bit of a different flavor as to how to do it. So, coming back to our discussion earlier, let's see who has the faster Fanfare stack ramping. So as you can see, we do struggle in the exact same team with a bit of energy here with Kokomi, despite us running something like the prototype Amber, which should help Kokomi, but Yelan herself definitely lags, and that means that we get Kokomi on the field a lot later than we really want to. So that delays the healing, which in turn delays the time that you get the maximum Fanfare stack. So there is a bit of an out of syncness that is happening here. Obviously this doesn't really happen with C2 and above with Arena, but at Caesar you can see it does take us a bit longer. So by the time Kokomi's burst is over, we get the maximum Fanfare stack buff and then the Fanfare stacks stop. Keep in mind though that whilst your Fanfare stacks are ramping, you still get a damage buff, so it's not like you need to be at max, just to make that clear. But regardless, you can definitely see the slowness, and then this then begs the question, with the way in which, with the fact that you get slower like Fanfare stacks, is that in total going to give you less team damage than with the Sigewinne variant? So keep in mind, Kokomi's Bakekurage does damage during her elemental burst, which is not negligible. Kokomi does Ocean U clan damage and she stands and does damage, but Sigewinne herself boosts the damage of your other teammates. So clearly what I think happens is that at the lower constellation levels, or at the C0 level here, effectively the Kokomi team out damages the Sigewinne team, but as your vertical investment becomes stronger, those flat damage buffs that you get just amplify throughout the Genshin Impact damage equation, and hence Sigewinne becomes a bit more valuable. A final thing that we can talk about, and I think this is what the final chamber really teaches us, is exactly the mobility aspect. So one of the things that is really awesome about Sigewinne is that she gives you more flexibility in terms of who can take the field at any given time. Do you want the hyper mobile Yelan? Do you want to swap between Yelan and Sucrose? Do you even want to stand up here with Sigewinne and tank some of the hits and keep your relative positioning? That is a couple of flexibilities that you get that you don't get with the Kokomi team. With Kokomi on the field, you need to go through a rotation, you need to play through the rotation, and in certain practical aspects, I think especially against like a single target, this is really, I think, going to give you an advantage over the Sigewinne teams, but in some of these AoE teams, that loss of flexibility can actually lead to an overall DPS loss. By the way, something really funny happens here in the background. When you swirl Pyro, use that Yelan E and just trigger a massive nuke. That's just a little bit of a tip there for you if you do manage to trigger it, by the way. And regardless, coming back to where our discussion was, what it comes down to with enemies that are extremely tricky and that make you lose your position, you can see it's like Sigewinne just stands still. It's just so incredible. But what happens is that against a big single target, yes, your Sigewinne teams are theoretically going to be better, and in AoE teams, your Kokomi teams are going to be better because Kokomi can do AoE damage. But if you've got more mobile enemies on the field that can also disrupt your relative positioning, then perhaps you might lose out on some of that AoE damage that Kokomi can give you, unless you then follow it up by being mobile. But because Kokomi forces you to be on the field, that's going to be a bit trickier. So hopefully with all of this, you guys can start understanding the relative advantages and disadvantages of the team. From my personal perspective, if you've got a lot of flying and ranged enemies, Kokomi actually then becomes quite a lot better because she can attack at range, and as long as her fish can actually hit an enemy, Yelan will follow suit, whereas with Sigewinne you won't get that luck, because even as a bow character, she won't be able, while she might be able to target some of the enemies, it's not going to be as flexible as what you'll get with Kokomi. So really, to break it down, there's so much flavor between these two characters. It's such a different play style, and that's really what I wanted people to get from this video. The relative advantages and disadvantages and how you need to play, when you need to put the characters on the field, the implications for ER. It's just beautiful. It's really what it makes Genshin and new characters incredibly exciting, and this is why when people disregard what Sigewinne does, you have to take it with a dose of skepticism, because the proof is in the pudding. You have to test these things and you have to get what really happens, and that's just awesome. In any case, I like Sigewinne, I like Kokomi. They're really awesome units, and if you've been keeping up, thank you so much for watching.